$1,000 challenge for Sister David and Christian Prince, the Christian apologetic clowns.
Peace be upon you, brothers and sisters, and Ramadan Mubarak. I am your new host Robo Hunter, and welcome to this channel. I will appear in some videos. And let me introduce you to Mr. Annihilation. Mr. Annihilation, how are you doing today?
I am fine, thank you Mr. Robo. Pleasure to be with you.
Pleasure to be with you too. What do you have for us today, Mr. Annihilation?
Sister David Wood is claiming that there are contradictions in Quran. Today I will bust all her false claims one by one. And I will turn the tables on her by giving horrible contradictions from her Bible. Also, I will give David Wood and Christian Prince $1,000 if they solved any of the Bible contradictions I am about to show. And I challenge any Christian to refute me regarding Bible contradictions. And Mr. Smarty will help me regarding Bible contradictions.
Great, so we have a new guest today. Hello Mr. Smarty.
Hello Mr. Robo. Hello Mr. Annihilation.
Okay brothers, let's do some intense busting mission.
What happened to Pharaoh when he was chasing the Israelites? Surah 10 verse 92 says that Allah saved him. Surah 17 verse 103 says that he drowned.
What happened to Pharaoh when he was chasing the Israelites? According to Surah 10 verse 92, Allah saved him. And according to Surah 72 verse 103, Pharaoh drowned.
David Wood is claiming that verse 1092 says that Allah saved the life of Pharaoh. However, this is not what the verse says at all. David Wood shows his blatant ignorance and lack of comprehension. In verse 1092, Allah said to Pharaoh that he will save his body after being drowned.
فَالْيَوْمَ نُنَجِّيكَ بِبَدَنِكَ لِتَكُونَ لِمَنْ خَلْفَكَ آيَةً وَإِنَّ كَثِيرًا مِنَ النَّاسِ عَنْ آيَاتِنَا لَغَافِلُونَ.
So today we will save you in body, that you may be to those who succeed you a sign. The meaning of this verse is that Allah will save the dead body of Pharaoh, i.e. his corpse, and preserve it, in order for his dead body to be a sign for people after him. Allah is clearly speaking about saving the body of Pharaoh, not his life. The verse is obviously speaking about the dead body of Pharaoh, not his life. Even Ibn Kathir, who was a scholar in the 14th century, confirmed this. He says in his commentary of verse 1092, Allah said, "Today we will save you," which means we will raise you up on the ground. Al-Hassan said regarding your body, it means body without soul in it. In conclusion, there is no contradiction at all between verses 1092 and verse 17:103. Verse 1092 simply means that Allah will save corpse of Pharaoh in order to be sign for people after him.
What is man created from? Surah 19 verse 67 says that man was created from nothing. Surah 96 verse 2 says that man was created from a clot of blood. Surah 21 verse 30 says that man was created from water. Surah 16 verse 4 says that man was created from a small seed. Surah 15 verse 26 says that man was created from clay and mud. Surah 3 verse 59 says that man was created from dust. Surah 11 verse 61 says that man was created from earth.
Sister David Wood is lying here. Verse 1976 doesn't even say that man was created from nothing. And there is no contradictions at all between all these verses which he showed. None of these verses say that human is created from clay only, or dust only, or sperm only. The word only was not mentioned in any of these verses. If I said, for example, in order to make a cake, you need sugar, water, butter and eggs. This means that you will need all of these ingredients in order to make the cake. This is exactly what these verses are like. Allah created human from all of these things. He created human from water, mud, dust, earth, small seed and clot of blood. And we can find many of these sources gathered in two verses. In Quran chapter 23 verse 12 to verse 14, Allah mentioned clay, seed and blood clot as stages of creation. This means that all of these sources were used in creation. And in another verse, we can find that Allah began the creation of man from clay. Then he made his offspring out of the extract of a liquid. So there is no contradiction at all.
Busted.
Sister David busted. Over.
Now let's turn the tables on Sister David and show horrible terrible Bible contradiction. Mr. Smarty, can you give us deadly Bible contradiction? Mr. Smarty, what's wrong?
Horrible Bible contradiction. Horrible Bible contradiction. Horrible Bible contradiction. Corruption. 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 Corruption.
Mr. Smarty, what happened?
Don't bother, Mr. Annihilation. He is already gone.
Why, Mr. Robo?
When you asked him to bring a horrible terrible Bible contradiction, he did really find a horrible terrible one. And while doing data processing, it exploded his CPU. You should have not asked him this question, Mr. Annihilation.
And what was his CPU?
It was Intel Core i9, latest model. Even Intel Core i1000 would not help. I knew that this will happen.
So what was the contradiction he was about to show?
Here it is. Most of us know the alleged story of Jesus' resurrection in the Bible. This story says that Jesus died and then was buried. Then he was resurrected from death after he was buried. However, we can find loads of horrible contradictions in this biblical resurrection story. For example, in Matthew chapter 28:8, the author says that there were women who went to the tomb of Jesus after his resurrection, and when they saw Jesus coming back to life, they ran to tell his disciples that he came back to life. The author says, so the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. This clearly means that the women immediately ran away to inform the disciples of Jesus' resurrection. However, if we read Mark 16:8, we will find a totally different narrative. In Mark 16:8, the author says, so they went out quickly and fled from the tomb, for they trembled and were amazed. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. So here in Mark 16:8, we can find that the women said nothing to anyone. While in Matthew chapter 28:8, the women ran to tell disciples of Jesus. This is such a horrible contradiction, which can't be fixed. And if Christians say that both Matthew 28:8 and Mark 16:8 are speaking about different events, then they are wrong. Because if we read Matthew 28:8 and Mark 16:8 in context, we will find that both of them are speaking about the same exact event. In Matthew 28:8, we can find that the angel said to the women, you are looking for Jesus. Also in Mark 16:8, the angel said to the women, you are looking for Jesus. In Matthew, the angel says, he is not here, he has risen. Also in Mark, the angel says, he is not here, he has risen. In Matthew, the angel says, see the place where he lay. Also in Mark, the angel says, see the place where they laid him. In Matthew, the angel says to the women to go tell his disciples. Also in Mark, the angel says to the women to go tell his disciples. In Matthew, the angel says, he going ahead of you into Galilee, there you will see him. Also in Mark, the angel says, he going ahead of you into Galilee, there you will see him. But, in Matthew, the women fled away from the tomb and ran to tell the disciples. While in Mark, the women fled away from the tomb and said nothing to anyone. This is a clear-cut, direct, obvious contradiction, which can't be fixed.
But wait, Mr. Robo, some Christians might say that the verses after Mark chapter 16 verse 8 in Mark's Gospel say that the women did tell the disciples about Jesus' resurrection. In Mark chapter 16 verses 9 and 10. We can see that Mary Magdalene told the disciples of Jesus about his resurrection. She went and told those who had been with him.
Well, unfortunately for them, all the biblical scholars agree that the verses after Mark chapter 16 verse 8 are later addition, which does not belong to the original Gospel of Mark, because the oldest and most reliable New Testament manuscripts doesn't contain these verses. The Gospel of Mark originally ends at chapter 16 verse 8. That is why the New Bible translations say that the oldest Bible manuscripts doesn't have the verses after Mark chapter 16 verse 8. Also, let's see one of the top Bible scholars confirm this.
In Mark's gospel, Jesus is put on trial, and he's crucified, he's dead, he's buried, and on the third day, the women go to the tomb. The tomb is empty, and Jesus is not in it. There's some man in there, and the man tells the women that Jesus is not here, he's been raised from the dead. He tells the women, go tell the disciples that he will meet them in Galilee. And then it says, the women fled from the tomb, and they didn't say anything to anyone, for they were afraid. Period. That's where it ends. That's the end of the Gospel of Mark. And you think, how could it end there? I mean, they're told to tell the disciples, but they don't tell anybody. Didn't the disciples ever learn? Didn't they go to Galilee? Didn't they see Jesus? How could that be the end of the story? And that's exactly the reaction the scribes had. They got to that ending, they said, how could it end there? And scribes then decided it couldn't add there, and so they added 12 verses. So that in your English Bibles today, you'll find 12 more verses after that, after chapter 16, verse 8, and often they'll be in double brackets, because the translators will tell you in a footnote, these verses weren't originally in here, these were added by later scribes. In these verses, in these added verses the scribes added later, but we know they're added later because they're not in the earliest and best manuscripts. The writing style is different from the rest of the Gospel of Mark, and in fact there are inconsistencies between this ending and the verses that precede it. So this is clearly an addition to the Gospel of Mark.
And in Codex Sinaiticus, which is one of the oldest and most reliable, complete Bible manuscripts, we can find that the Gospel of Mark originally ends at chapter 16 verse 8. Even the scribe of this manuscript writes Kata Markon after verse 8, which means by Mark.
The New Testament also states that true Christians can drink poison, Mark chapter 16, and not be harmed.
As far as the Mark, that comes from the end of Mark, which practically every scholar, every Bible scholar in the world says was not authentic, that this was a later addition, 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 that this was a later addition.
So here we can see that David would himself agree that the verses after Mark chapter 16 verse 8 are later addition. Which means that David would himself agree that his Bible is corrupted and distorted.
Is that why Mr. Smarty was saying corruption?
Yes, indeed. And if a Christian say that the verses after Mark chapter 16 verse 8 are not later addition, then they will fall into another problem. Because Mark chapter 16 verse 18 say that true Christians should drink deadly poison, handle deadly snakes, and will not be harmed. And these signs will accompany those who believe. In my name they will drive out demons, they will speak in new tongues, they will pick up snakes with their hands, and when they drink deadly poison, it will not hurt them at all. They will place their hands on sick people, and they will get well. And this is obviously false. Because many pastors have died after drinking poison and handling snakes in the church. And I am yet to see a Christian who speak in tongues or heal sick people miraculously. So Christians have two choices here. Either they accept that verses after Mark 16:8 are later addition, or they accept that they are not later addition. If they chose the first choice, they will fall in a horrible massive problem. Because this choice means that the women didn't tell anyone about the resurrection of Jesus. And this contradicts the other Gospels. And if they chose the second choice, then this means that they should speak in tongues, pick up snakes, drink deadly poison, heal sick people miraculously. And obviously they can't do any of this.
This is really embarrassing.
Yes, indeed. So embarrassing and pathetic.
We need to fix this horrible Bible corruption contradiction. Should we call Christian Prince to fix it?
He can't even defend his religion. He runs away from his Bible like a chicken. I challenge him to refute us.
Let's give it a try.
Da-da-dun, da-da-dun. Da-da-dun, da-da-dun. Da-da-dun, da-da-dun. Da-da-dun, da-da-dun.
Hello, Christian Prince. We have a massive problem in your so-called Holy Bible. Matthew chapter 28:8 says that the women told the disciples about resurrection of Jesus, while Mark 16:8 says that the women didn't tell anyone about resurrection of Jesus. Beside the verses after Mark 16:8 are proven to be fabrication. What is your response to this mega problem? Hello? Come on, what is your response?
Are you there, brother?
Come on, Christian Prince. You understand my question very well. Stop playing dumb.
Didn't I tell you that he runs away from his Bible like a chicken?
Let's give it another try.
Da-da-dun, da-da-dun. Da-da-dun, da-da-dun. Da-da-dun, da-da-dun. Da-da-dun, da-da-dun.
The person you are calling is playing dead. Please do not call again because he is so embarrassed.